1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, Ukraine continues to impose sanctions on Russian oil with its latest strike on a Russian oil refinery. As it continues its 7-day barrage on Russian oil and industrial facilities where the new Flamingo missile comes into its own. The Russian response? To kill children. I'm Philip Ingram, standing in this week for Jerome Starkey, who's taken a little bit of deserved leave. So, our first story. A drone strike triggered a large fire at a Russian oil refinery in the city of Ufa, 1,400 kilometers deep in the east of Russia. The strike targeted the AVT-5 primary distillation unit at the Bashneft Novoil refinery, one of the key installations responsible for processing crude oil, and it's processing about 7 million tons of oil annually. This is another example of Ukraine imposing sanctions on Russian oil as they've continued to do for months now. Ukraine continues to impose its sanctions using its new Flamingo cruise missile with a range of over 1,000 kilometers and a warhead of 1.1 tons of high explosives. Here it has hit an explosive factory at Promzintez in the Samara Oblast. It makes explosives for Russian shells, for Russian rockets, and produces over 30,000 tons of explosives a year. This is part of Ukraine's campaign to destroy the nitrate factories that Russia is using, making propellants, explosives, and other nitrogen-based products. This is enhanced by the shortage of nitrates coming out of the Gulf with Donald Trump's war against Iran. A lot of it is stuck in the Red Sea, unable to get out through the Straits of Hormuz. And whilst Ukraine is doing that, it also continues to hit the Ust-Luga oil export port on the Baltic Sea, here for the fourth time. The port, capable of exporting 700,000 barrels of oil a day, 40% of all Russian oil exports, Ukraine is closing it down. Oil is becoming even more critical. The sanctions that were imposed on Russia, Donald Trump has lifted temporarily, only for oil that is already on board ships, the shadow fleet that we're seeing sailing around the world. But that is giving Vladimir Putin a little bit of a breather because he can sell his oil at market rates, over $110 a barrel, whereas it was capped beforehand. He can sell it out to the Indian market, to the Chinese market, into the Turkish market, and make billions of dollars. However, a lot of that billions of dollars has been wiped out by other financial woes that Russia has got. Putin is remaining quiet. The oil crisis should be playing into his hands and helping him. It doesn't seem to be. The Russian response, a glide bomb attack on the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk on Palm Sunday. It killed 3, including a 13-year-old, killing children whilst Ukraine is destroying Russia's defense industrial base. That's their response. 13 others, aged between 20 and 80, injured in the midday attack, which hit multiple buildings. And now starting to take a look at the close battle. Ukraine has wrestled the initiative back, it seems. They've re-established control of the village of Noye Donbass in the Dobropilya direction. That's in the Donetsk Oblast. The village itself, population of 549, total land area less than 1 square kilometer. It's not very big, but they've been fighting over it for 2 months and 5 days. However, we have to remember the casualty rates for these territories. Russia is losing over 1,000 troops a day, dead or wounded. Ukraine is probably losing about a quarter of that a day, dead or wounded. And that's across the whole of the front line. But this, 2 months and 5 days of fighting over somewhere that just held 549 people before the war started. And this huge cost is across the whole of the front line. The Institute for the Study of War has been watching this closely over the last year. And Russian advances over the past 12 months have slowed and slowed dramatically. They continue to capture elements of territory, about 10 square kilometers a day over that period of time. However, this is about 50% of what they had captured the year beforehand. And these statistics only go up to March this year. Since then, through March and since then, Ukraine seems to have wrestled the tactical initiative back and seems to be on the front foot and is advancing itself, capturing more territory than it's losing. Could this be the turning point for the Ukrainians? Could the Russians finally be put in a position where they're going to lose? only time will tell. So whilst the tactical battle is going on, whilst the Ukrainians are imposing their sanctions at the operational level, affecting Russia's ability to continue to fund the war or to build ammunition for the war, then the political backdrop is critical. And Ukraine is relying on a 90 billion euro loan coming from the EU. However, there's one man, one country stopping it, Viktor Orban of Hungary. And as Orban continues to impose his stop on the EU presenting that money, the EU have come up with a plan to try and get some money to Kyiv in the interim, and are working ways round this block that Orban is putting in place. A letter from Marta Kos, European Commissioner for Enlargement, to Ruslan Stefanchuk, the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, suggested that the adoption of a number of new laws as part of Ukraine's succession plan to the EU would be a way forward. Effective and swift adoption of these measures would unlock up to 4 billion euros in funding of Ukraine. So workarounds happen, but it shows the weakness of the EU. One person, one country, a small percentage of the population of the whole bloc can stop policy that affects international politics and defence. And then it's not just the EU where politics is causing problems. We've got language difficulties between President Zelensky of Ukraine and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State from the United States. President Zelensky turned around and said that the US security guarantees as part of any peace plan would only come into play if Ukraine gave up the territory it already holds in the Donbass. Marco Rubio said that is not what he said. He said whenever there is a peace agreement in place. Both are right. The current peace agreement that Russia is proposing requires Ukraine to give up the territory it still holds in the Donbass. Marco Rubio has not referred to that and could be right by a peace plan coming in where the front lines are frozen at the moment. When we're getting disputes over language like this, I think a peace plan is still far away. And now to your questions. Thank you for posing them and thank you for watching. You're getting them from a former senior British military intelligence officer and NATO planner, not a professional journalist like Jerome. So we've got slightly different views and slightly different opinions. First question is, has Ukraine just exposed a massive flaw in the Russian air defense system? Assuming these were launched from Chernihiv and headed due north, and reach the outskirts of St. Petersburg, does this mean that Russian air defense systems are concentrated on Moscow? Would this be reassuring to the Baltic republics? Very good question. And actually, it brings out a much wider issue. Ukraine, if you look at what it's been doing over the last 12, 24 months, it's been systematically destroying elements of the Russian air defense system. We always thought they had a fantastic integrated air defense system covering most of Russia, certainly covering its major cities of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the industrial sites in between. That is clearly not the case. Ukraine has dismantled a lot of it, but it clearly wasn't as integrated as we thought. And it's had to move a large percentage of it to fill the holes in other areas that Ukraine has managed to destroy. Moscow, of course, is the center of focus. That's where Putin wants the majority of his air defenses. So, yes, Ukraine has exposed a massive flaw. It's showing that its Flamingo cruise missile, which isn't as stealthy as the Tomahawk cruise missile, can still get through the Russian air defenses and still have a massive effect. It's showing that its other drones, which are even slower and even more visible to air defense systems, can get through the Russian air defense systems. The Russians are not as infallible as everyone thought they were. Next question is, what I don't understand is that the strikes like these on Russian infrastructure seem to be minor inconveniences for Russia, which it is suggested will repair and rebuild this infrastructure in a few days, which is in stark contrast to the Middle East, where it is reported to be the end of the world, saying the UAE, for example, will take a decade to rebuild. Why? I think that comes into the control of the information that's coming out. The Russians are not reporting the full damage that has been caused. A lot of the Ukrainian targeting is against distillation plants. It's against parts and components within the Russian oil refinery and within the Russian defense industrial base that rely on components coming from overseas, components that are sanctioned. When it comes to the UAE, we're much more open. the UAE can turn around and say, this will take us a long time to repair because we can't get these things on the international market and they don't have any sanctions imposed on them. Russia always wants to downplay the damage. The UAE is being open about what's going on because they know that that will affect the market. Russia is controlling the information domain. The UAE, surprisingly, isn't. And our final question, how are all the strikes on Russian oil infrastructure actually affecting Russian income? Is the Ukrainian strategy mainly to make life miserable for Russians, or is it the priority, the Russian economy? If it's the economy, is it having any effect? Well, that is a fascinating question, and is it the key of how long this conflict is going to go on? Because the front lines, the tactical battle, both sides are effectively stalemated. A few tens of kilometers, one way or the other, every day, every week, every month isn't going to change the battlefield. The ability to continue to fund the war, to continue to fund the tactical battle is key. Ukraine has got the backing of the EU when it can unlock the EU billions. Russia relies on its oil infrastructure and its oil revenue. And indications suggest that Russia has lost at least 40% of its total oil revenue, and that is coming down further and further and further. So actually, Ukrainian tactics are exactly right. Destroy Russia's ability to fund its conflict. Destroy Russia's ability in attacking the factories in the defense industrial base to manufacture its own weapons. Increase its reliability on North Korea. I, as an ex-military man, would not stand beside a weapon with North Korean shells in it and pull the lanyard. I would want to be a long, long way away because the chances of it going bang in the weapon and not when it leaves the end of the barrel are much higher. And relying on China. And we have to ask, what price is China imposing on its loans to Russia, and how is it going to cash those in the future? So yes, it is having a massive effect on the Russian economy. And we're seeing prices and inflation rising across Russia, and we're seeing unemployment beginning to go up and funding into the defense industry being cut. So thanks for watching today and putting up with me standing in for Jerome. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments below. Hit like. Pass copies to your friends, please. We want more and more people to come into our channel and watch. And of course, please subscribe. I look forward to talking to you at some stage in the future. Thank you. Goodbye.